Hello and welcome to Voices of Change Stories That Matter. I'm your host, Andrea Kanaris, and today we're joined by Isobel O'Connell. She is an award-winning ESG and external relations leader with over 20 years of global experience, turning shared value ambitions into measurable impact. Her focus is social environmental performance, strategy, reporting, and change management. She aims to build trust and collaboration among diverse stakeholders. Isobel has helped organisations embed ESG principles into their operations and align business goals and social value. She has worked across the Middle East, Latin America, Europe, Asia, and Russia. She holds an MPA, a Bachelor's in Geography and Human Social Development, is that correct? And is a postgraduate certificates in investor relations with an ESG strategy, data analytics, leadership, sustainability management, and human rights and gender empowerment. Isobel, thank you very much for joining me today.
Thank you for having me.
So I always thought we could perhaps start with having a bit of discussion around social performance and what it means for you and how you apply that in your work.
Well, wonderful. And I'm dialing in from Vancouver, Canada, but that is the hereditary territory of the Squamish, Tsleil-Waututh, and Musqueam First Nation. So just very important that I live in their hereditary territory, and I appreciate that I work and play in this territory as well. But your question, so it's a deep space, social performance, but I like to usually describe it as how a company shows up in people's lives. It's everything from how we respect human rights to how we manage impacts, engage with communities, and create like real social value. So I've had a mixed bag in my career, but I've mainly worked in industrial companies, and I've seen where companies can take social performance very seriously and not. And really, I always see social performance as the best way to bring it to the forefront is through proper governance, rights-based engagement, transparent data, and getting those project approvals, but working with the partners to get those project approvals. So building the trust, and of course, always ensuring that there are fewer operational disruptions. So what I like to say is at the end of the day, it's risk management, but it's also relationship building, and those work hand in hand together.
Yeah, that's a beautiful way of putting it, especially that wrap up in the beginning, that the relationship between not just managing risk, but also building those relationships. And you mentioned transparency through your response, and just how critical is that transparency in terms of building trust, and what does it look like? Like, you can give an example for those listening on how you may go about building that trust, and what role does transparency have in that?
Okay, well, building the trust, first and foremost, starts as two people having a conversation, or just people having a conversation. Maybe it's over a kitchen table, maybe it's in a boardroom. It really depends on the context and where those stakeholders and partners want to meet you at. Transparency, well, of course, there is the approvals, but sometimes, in the permitting world, we're working in geographies that don't have strong permitting, or there has to be permitting that's built along the way. But how I like to see it is now social performance, let's say maybe 15 years ago, but more like 20 years ago, it was what was done after the project was built or after the initiative took place or was executed. Now it's done at the front end. So it's like not public relations, but it is in a sense public relations, external relations, but it's done before the actual project or initiative begins. And that's what helps also build the trust. And of course, that transparency as well. When I've worked in major industrial projects, having a project office where members of communities can come and speak to whether it's executives or even on-site operational team members, having those open houses, also having, a good website and keeping that up to date. Social media is really important as well now, like having a good Facebook site or Instagram site that can instantaneously get the message out to people. Having intermediaries, at site, those are very important as well. So those community relations positions, but also to having good working relationships with government as well, because government also do their own stakeholder engagement and
Yes.
consultation processes. And that's very important to be aligned with them as well. And understanding what are the material risks and issues that a community, a province, or even a country is dealing with. And, I always say at the simplest level, but it's not simple. A good grievance mechanism in place is so important. And having that grievance mechanism as an anonymous one, or one where an individual could choose to put their name and contact details down. Not always necessary, but it does help as well. So in a nutshell, that's where I see trust and transparency. It is good dialogue, good consultation, and that being open for business in that sense of, okay, we're going beyond what we need to do, what is the usual, because
Yes.
it was considered unusual at the time, and now it's just good business practice.
Yeah. That's a fantastic example. And you mentioned, that things have shifted. It's not coming in after the project has started or kicked off. We've kind of
Hmm.
redefined when a project starts.
Hmm.
They're coming early in that pre-approvals phases, in the conceptualization of projects, even. So when you enter a new project with the community, how do you start? How do you start that? You mentioned social media, and has social media affected and changed how we're starting those conversations with the community? And how important is it to have both online and offline discussions with them?
Okay, well, your first question, when I go in to a community, I listen for tensions and expectations first. So, not all formal briefing notes, but those are very important as well.
Yeah.
Looking at historically what's gone on in that community, also, or, at that operation site or at the factory, but also understanding, what's worrying people. And that is sometimes the history that has been carried through not only the company internally, but also the work that has been done in that community. What other industries have played a role in that community? So the first conversation is usually, it's a big like a reveal party, and it shows where the real risks are and where the company, or even myself as a practitioner, has to look for, okay, where's the dignity, where's the trust, and whether people feel decisions are being made with them or to them or about them. They don't want, they need to be partners in it. And then of course there's always the early signals that shape everything, because as a company and as an individual in some respect, and that's where the social media can come in, because people check people's social media pages. Really, you have to look at, okay, what is the risk profile of the company? What is the governance approach? And how fast can the company move? Because that's the next thing that a community will always want to know. Or even like your shareholders, stakeholders, investors, they want to know how fast that a company can act on the feedback they receive. So social media is really key because, well, it's that instantaneous message. It's also where people can communicate with the company as well. So that can be through a like, it can be through a share, it can be through a comment. And sometimes comments can be both helpful and not very helpful. But, it does make that easier, because sometimes people provide feedback easier on social media channels than, let's say, through, they don't want to come to a open house or a consultation engagement piece. However, I have found in my career working in stakeholder engagement, and specifically in communities where there are extractive industries, if there's some good food that's being offered, people will often, it's a great way to bring stakeholders together. If it's a good meal, sitting around a table and just having a conversation and learning about one another. So what I'm saying is, a company, and as somebody who's worked in social responsibility for many years, it's finding that balance. Digital's great, but face to face at the initial stages definitely is a must. And I'm going to say throughout the project is a must as well.
Yes, that's a perfect example. And I've certainly experienced that around, particularly the face to face early. I find it easier to go online once you've had the connection, particularly with
Exactly.
directly affected stakeholders, like whether they be the landholders or the near neighbours or just the general community who either have some kind of stake in the benefits or the impacts of the project. But I find that once you've established that face-to-face rapport, it's a lot easier to then shift to an online space. I also loved that idea of the meals too, because I found that everywhere. And I wonder if that just taps into the humanness of something. It's just about being people. And it helps remind us that we're all just people, and breaking bread together is always traditionally been a lovely way to connect with others. So I guess that's a great tip if anyone has it, bring food.
Exactly. And sometimes too, it's finding which social media platform the community prefers. I know for a fact in Canada, many First Nations prefer Facebook over, let's say, Instagram, or, sometimes with lobby groups or, civil society, X is better than another social media platform. And it's also important to, once you get that face to face, is to understand, okay, what are the main Facebook sites or Instagram sites that are being used by community groups in wherever you're operating? So is there a, swap and trade that we should, at least, become a member of as a company? Is there, what are the different sports teams that we need to know about? Those sorts of things. So, and then drive traffic that is, to your own company website. Have the, not website, but, social media site and website. I shouldn't say, put down websites either. But yeah, I think those are keys, so for announcements and so forth.
Yeah, I think that's really important to find out where they gather. And that's kind of the way
Exactly.
I look at it. It's like, know where the community gathers and go there. As I have been, and a lot of companies who have spent a lot of time making sure they're wonderful websites, it's kind of a bit of an ouch to hear this, but no one really cares about your website. It's great to have one, you have to have one, but no one's really running around looking for your website. It's
No,
really incumbent on us to find them, isn't it? And to find where they like to play and communicate
exactly.
and gather together. They're really
Mhm.
great. So, in your vast experience in lots of different locations, you must have gotten a sense for what good engagement not just looks like, but feels like. What are the signalers to you that this is a good engagement process? Like, how do you measure as you're going along to yourself? What are the flaggers that make you go, this feels right? This feels like this is a good piece of engagement. This is going well versus, and we've all had them where you're going, something's not quite, we haven't, we either missed something or it's just not quite going well. Do you have any piece of advice for people of what to look for?
Absolutely. And that's a loaded question, Andrea. Thank you. So I will try to pull it apart and be as succinct as possible. Good engagement, it's reliable, it's, respectful, and it's, of course, very responsive. There's always the key of not selling a message. What you're doing is engaging in a genuine dialogue. So it's not a shot in the one shot in the pan. It's or a quick splash in the pan. People can really see input reflected in decisions and not just meeting minutes. However, meeting minutes are very important. I definitely am not putting those down, but it really is being reliable, being respectful, being responsive, and finding a model that works. And I have found over the years the best model for consultation is IAP2, which is the Institute for Public Participation. And they have a spectrum that's very good that basically takes it through from input in, input out, right through to, okay, empowering a community. And it's a 5-step process. I would encourage listeners to look it up. I know it's very popular in Australia as it is here in Canada. And it's been used in many different sectors as well. And it's a great starting place, but also it's great to just use throughout because at the end of the day, especially in the industries I've worked in, we want to empower the stakeholders, and the stakeholders can be everyone from the investors straight through to the, local cafe. It really does depend. But bad engagement, and yeah, I've seen bad engagement, bad consultation. It's very performative. It shows up as communities repeating the same concerns over the years. And it's almost like history repeating itself. Or a company that thinks the information sessions equal consent. So that's that information out only, no information in, which
Yeah.
is really tough. Or sometimes companies, they'll sort of have a selective invitation list for stakeholders to come and give their opinions. Or, a company, let's say bad engagement sometimes is not showing up for local government meetings. It's very
Yes.
important because often it's, the whole thinking is, well, the permitting all takes place at the, state or provincial or federal or even international level. So I've seen like across the regions, if communities are managed or feel they're being managed instead of respected, that's where trust is really lost very quickly. So it's
Yeah.
that balanced approach around how you deal with stakeholders. And, sometimes there's the brutal truth, Andrea, that we as practitioners have to rank our stakeholders around the issues. And that has
Yes.
to be done in a very, no, I want to say polite, but I would say in a very pragmatic manner.
Yes. Yeah, that's a good point. There's a lot of pragmatism in what we do, particularly when you're following that approvals pathway.
Hmm.
There's a lot of things that, and we always, I always talk about, not being tick box. And I think that's something that we all want to avoid. But it's kind of unavoidable in some regard because, as you point out, there are things pragmatically that we have to do. And in doing so, we do have to kind of tick those regulatory boxes for the clients. But I think what you point out in how you eloquently described how you can lose trust is that if you're only focused on the things that you have to do to tick those boxes, that you may make assumptions that aren't real. You may miss stakeholders that are important. And once you do that, it's a pretty slippery slope into a lack of trust.
Yes.
And I think that a lot of people would believe that once you lose trust, and we hear this all the time, once you've lost trust, you won't get it back. Do you hold that position? I believe that you can win trust back, but I believe that A, you have to want to, and B, you have to be really dedicated and focused in correcting errors and in doing the right thing. Do you have any tips for someone who finds themselves in a position where trust may be lacking or not there? How would someone go in correcting that scenario?
Oh, well, at the company level, governance is very important. So having
Yeah.
that senior team out front and center as well, very important. Have them visible and engaged. I mean, I've even seen where board of directors members come to visit sites and really spending time, let's say, in the cafeteria, not eating in a separate room or at a restaurant, eating with everybody, whether it's workers, whether it's community members. Also, too, around strengthening that trust or rebuilding it, being honest about the need to rebuild the trust. And I've seen where, let's say, company members, and some of them being executives, will go to a community event, whether it's an ice hockey game or a local
Mhm.
football match or a lacrosse match or supporting something in the community and physically being there as well,
Yes.
hosting the community, as I said, to a meal, also to being very aligned with, let's say, government agencies and showing that, okay, yes, we are working all together towards something. And as of course I've said before, engage regularly, if not often, and document the engagements as well. And that can be even just phone calls. Those are important as well, those conversations. So I'm also a great believer in where I live where I work. So I moved back to Canada in 2020 and I went and worked for a large liquefied natural gas project in social performance. And I was very proud to work in the same and live in the same province where the project is being built. Because yes, I had to fly in and fly out, but at the same time, I was a resident of the same province of where it was being built. And I've done that also in my international work as well. I have lived, maybe not in those communities, but sometimes, but at the same time, living at least close by. So understanding the political issues, the community issues, the socioeconomic issues of that region. But trust really does grow when people see corporate commitments backed by transparent systems. Like I said, my first example, the grievance mechanism, very important. Leaders, like I said, showing up consistently. And those leaders can be everyone from, let's say, the CEO to the community relations specialist. And if it's a joint venture between many companies sharing the load of the work, don't just have some of the joint venture partners companies showing up, all of them showing up consistently, pardon me. The company can fix problems quickly and visibly. It's also too having that humbleness as well, because more often than not, we don't know the community like the community residents do. So it's always good to have that opportunity to learn, of course, but always being that continuous learner. And I mean, at the end of the day, Andrea, it's not perfection. It's all about being, reliable. That's what's
Yes,
important.
I love that, because I think there are times where we can fall into seeking some kind of perfection in terms of trust
Yes.
and relationships. But I really love what you said about how to, rebuild trust. That really importance in owning the role you took in losing that trust in the first place, in showing up, in being present, in listening, and in showing
Hmm.
up consistently. I love that. I think it's something that everyone can do, and especially if you layer it in that last message you don't have to do it perfectly, you just have to do it consistently and from a really honest place. um
Exactly. Yeah.
Being
And I think a
authentic.
great,
Yeah,
and I
sorry.
think a really great example actually took place in Australia. And I think was it 2021? The Todra Gorge, Rio Tinto.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, yes. And that was, I mean, it was a tragedy in terms of for that particular community. It was a terrible error to have made, and yes, they've had to work very hard and commit themselves to rebuilding their trust with that community. So yes, that is an example of where they've been actively doing that. And the first step was putting their hands up and go, yeah, we made a mistake.
Exactly. And, having the CEO do that, and when they brought the new CEO in, him doing that wonderful tour almost of every site imaginable, or not just imaginable, but that Rio Tinto had, and being consistently
Mhm.
in front of the media.
And I think that's a really important point. This was a new CEO who could have easily gone, this had nothing to do with me, which I think we've all seen similar kind of scenarios before. That wasn't
Hmm.
me. That was when a company's been bought, and they'll go, that wasn't us. We didn't do that. But this CEO of Rio Tinto, as you said, did exactly the right thing. It was a textbook going, I work for this organization and I represent this organization. We made a mistake, and owning it, even though he could have taken a whole different path. He took what was a very wise path to own it and to work towards building that trust. So that is a beautiful example. The way that CEO said, when I take on this role, I take on all of the good, bad, and the ugly that comes along with it. Yeah, yeah, that is lovely. So when you've got a room full of skeptics, which happens a lot in our business,
Hmm.
they don't believe that the company's going to do what they said they're going to do, and they've got a whole range of questions, and they're skeptical. I mean, I guess this is where that trust builds in, right?
Exactly.
So if someone was faced with that, because we may have some young people watching that are early in their career, and there's a bit of a difference between theory and practice. So what would be your advice to them if they find themselves in a room full of stakeholders, community members, landholders, maybe, whatever the case may be, traditional owners, First Nations people? How would you handle that kind of scenario? What is the kind of tone of voice you would use? What is the kind of the kind of message you would leave with them? What's the kind of conversation you would have in that scenario?
Another very excellent question. Thank you. But first and foremost, listen more. That is so important. Throughout my career, I wish I'd done a little bit more listening.
Yeah.
Come prepared, but come prepared for maybe only 25% of what one is prepared is going to be discussed. Always come prepared. Come with a very steady voice as well. So don't bring emotion into the room. too much. Of course, bring empathy, and also too, it's okay, especially if you're new into the profession of social performance and social responsibility, to, of course, thank people for their input. And if one is not able to respond to the question, say, it's okay, I'm going to take this away. I know somebody who, there's somebody at the company I work for who can better respond to this. Because I have seen in so many incidences where companies gone out too quick. Somebody's gone out too quick with information. And in social media world, this happens a lot as well. Something is said, it goes out, and they can't always reel the rug back in. It's hard once the carpet's been reeled out. Also, too, for young people, get good mentors, get some coaching, watch others, and sometimes there's some great stuff on YouTube, and see how they work in their stakeholder engagement field. Be a learner, so get some really good training as well, like I was saying about IEP2, maybe even some other consultation methods. I'm a big fan of appreciative inquiry. That's when one works in it's sort of pre-strategic planning, and it's when one works with, let's say, a company or a team or even a community, and they start with what they do well, as opposed to what are the challenges and the weaknesses. It's what are our strengths, what are our opportunities. That's very important as well. And also too, with young people, and I'm noticing this more and more in the social performance profession, because burnout is high, look after one's own mental health. Check in with yourself, especially when you're working with communities that have been marginalized or very vulnerable or have experienced trauma. Let's say like what in the communities within the Todra Gorge, the Aboriginals, they come from a background of a lot of trauma. And at times it's like, okay, we need to learn more. I need to learn more about trauma therapy. And maybe I need to have somebody on the team who also has that experience of dealing with communities that have been traumatized by industry or government in some respects. And it's a historical process. In Canada, we have what we call the reconciliation process, where we are all being held to account on how we work with First Nations communities and how we approach them, how we, of course, work with them, but also how we build legacy with them as well. And can be a personal approach. It can be a community approach. It can be a company approach. But yeah, I think that's very important. But getting back to the mental health piece, that's where one has to learn as well, like to not necessarily check out, but know when to step back, because we all have to learn our boundaries as well. And I've seen where many young professionals in the social performance field, me included, just got too entrenched, too in the trenches. And at the end of the day, there's the reminder of where and who you work for as well. Yes. And that's where capacity building is very important. So building up that community profile around that project or initiative, very important. And even that works internally as well, because in social performance, we also have to deal a lot with, let's say, employee engagement, how we engage employees from other areas of the company in our work.
There's so much there's so much in what you said, and mental health, I think, is one that's not talked about enough in our field, whether it be wherever you work on the spectrum, whether it's the social performance side of things, whether it's just social impact, whether you're in particular niches. But we often in the social performance, social impact world are dealing a lot of the time with vulnerable groups, as you say, which means there is degrees of trauma. And even if it doesn't escalate to the degree of traumatic experience, there's a lot of hurt feelings, strong emotions, a lot of fear, perhaps, around what this project means for them.
Mm-hmm.
If you're not practiced in, I guess, putting those boundaries around your professional persona in terms of that not over-connecting, and I think we all have, I know I have, like you said, been over-invested, and I believe that our work to do really well have to be bipartisan. And I would love to see more and more companies and more, even, and if your company doesn't have it, I would encourage people to find somebody that you can debrief with. It's kind of the health model around having, counselors have it, emergency services, they debrief. And
Mm-hmm.
because they work in very emotionally charged environments. And I think that's really important. So I'm glad you mentioned that one because I think it's really important and not talked about
Yes.
often enough. So thank you for raising that one. There's a lot of misconceptions that companies have around communities. I think you may have touched on one or two, but it'd be nice to go in deeper, given your experience in a wide range of countries, but also across different organizations. What do you think the most common misconceptions might be that companies have around the communities when they go in? And I guess what strategies have you adopted to help guide companies to understand those misconceptions and to go in with a more, I guess, open mind in terms of when they're first engaging with their communities?
Well, I think a misconception for companies
Yes.
about communities is often communities, they just want benefits. So they just want money or they just want resources to fill in the gap where government can't always address it or where another company refuses to give them, let's say, a new roof for the recreation center or something along that line. But in reality, I've always found that communities really care about, when working with companies, is being respected, fairness, and being part of the decisions that affect them. And that's, getting back to the trust question and discussion we had, because there's nothing worse than a community feeling like, oh, the government and this company made a decision and we weren't even consulted about it, or we were soft consulted about it. So
Yes.
whether I'm working in communities in the Middle East or South America or even Canada, the pattern is really the same. People want dignity and they want agency. And if you get that right, benefit conversations can become really constructive. And if you get it wrong, well, no amount of investment compensates for that because it is such a long backtrack that it's like going down a spiraling staircase or Alice going down the tunnel in Alice in
Yes.
Wonderland, something like that. So
Yeah.
it gets back to, don't go, as a company, don't go in too quick. Go in and really learn about the community, learn whether it's an urban city or whether it's a rural community, really learn what is important to them. Even, find out who are considered the leaders in the community. And it doesn't have to be an elected official. It
Yes.
can be somebody like the manager of the recreation center is a
Mm.
community leader, and to get them on side, it's very important too. But then there's also the misconception with companies too that around communities is they only want us there for one reason. But also I've seen, and this was in my recent work with a company here in British Columbia, it's an LNG company. They were very keen to bring the community closer to government agencies where everyone could meet and we could decide, what's best for the company, what's best for the community, and how can we ensure that, there is enough health care facilities for both the workers, because there was an influx of construction workers in the community, but also how it's not going to impact the community that already is in place. So it is, we need to then have we company X need to have a separate clinic. The workers who are building the site, also understanding the roads, what needs to be done around ensuring that the roads are kept up, or will understand traffic patterns, we being the company. Again, very important issues that often get overlooked or not analyzed closely enough and on a regular basis, or being discussed, because there's only so much that we can all do. We all don't have eyes in the back of our head and so forth, and our ears to the ground everywhere. And that's where I think it's very important where, company X, how can you be a conduit between the community and, let's say, other communities, and of course to government agencies?
So important because those issues, I think anyone listening who's done this work even just for a little while will have seen the
Hmm.
intersections of what you're talking about. Traffic
Exactly.
workers coming in, the complexities of, yes, you've got the host community, the community that the usual residents, but then you've got this temporary residency that may be 2 years, maybe 5 years, maybe 10 years. But how are they going to affect infrastructure and roads? And I think the other thing that really resonated with me, and I think is a challenge, is the ongoing monitoring. And, it doesn't stop with identifying that these things are an issue, but it really is incumbent around across that project, really keeping an eye on the assumptions that were made in your assessment, risk
Yes.
assessment up front, and go, did we get it right? Because predictive, we're not very we're kind of good at prediction, but we're kind of not really. And we get things wrong and we make the wrong assumptions, and we only know what we know at a given point in time. So the monitoring is critically important.
Exactly. And that's where having a good risk registry comes into play as well,
Yeah.
and keeping that up to date, and speaking to other departments within the company as
Yeah.
well, because often external relations, where social performance often sits, it can be a real challenge to get information from, let's say, the engineering department. But if one goes through, let's say, a platform that is understood throughout the company, that's an
Yes.
excellent way to build conversations or even start conversations with
Yeah.
your internal stakeholders.
Yes. And that's a good point that you make, because we've been talking about community and the importance in a role like yours that you
Hmm.
hold, that, you're managing all these external stakeholders outside, from community to government, departments at various levels of government, from local to provincial, federal. But there's also this internal relationships, and especially the large organizations, which in themselves can be quite with their own internal silos that you have to navigate. And that's a skill
Exactly.
as well, that if you don't want to neglect either, because neglecting either will impact on your ability to be effective in your role, for sure, I would imagine.
Hmm.
So when you're talking about, you've talked a lot about social value, and I guess those things like the community benefits are a big part of that.
Hmm.
How do you get companies and investors and executives on board? How do you get them to buy into the social value piece?
Well, I'm going to possibly contradict myself a little bit here, and it's data. I know. And data can be qualitative or quantitative. So
Yeah.
it's just, and like I said, the risk registry is very important, that piece as well. And understanding, okay, what are the other risks that other agencies are seeing? Understanding that. But at the
Yes.
executive, and I'm talking especially at the board level, because I've been working a lot with boards recently, they really respond well to risk and evidence because they are the safeguarders of strategy.
Hmm.
So that's what helps them. And it's not to be afraid of data. Data is very important. We live in a data driven world right now. So we collect it, but we have to learn how to use it better. So you need to
Yes.
be very audit ready as well, because boards and executives respond to that well. So having those data systems aligned to, let's say, grievance mechanisms, incidents, closures or reporting, particularly Indigenous participation, very important. And of course, any stakeholder participation, and also understanding controls as well. So working with the audit team, the finance team, and that, let's say, the health and safety team, very important, because they are the holders of data, and they can often help an external relations team or even a social performance person alone jumpstart on a data journey.
Yes, I
And
agree.
yeah, exactly. And that it's also too, when you're working in an environment where more and more now companies are working in a joint venture environment in many sectors. It's not just
Definitely.
one company doing something. They're working, let's say, in partnership with civil society, in partnership with government, in partnership with another company. And sometimes they form a whole different company. I've seen that definitely in the mining sector. And
Definitely.
that's where risks and data are very important. And because when you you being company X or social performance practitioner, when you raise risks, issues, that's where trust can be strengthened as well. And because, it brings down the area of where there might be exposure, or just understanding that that's something on the horizon, a risk, an opportunity, and knowing that that comfort of, okay, the company understands this risk that we may have, and we're going to manage it together. So yeah, so once, you're grounded in good social value and you have traceable data, it's nice to then move to the nice to haves and the non-technical risks, because that's where the impact comes in as well. You can show where impact is measured and being managed and monitored.
Yeah, I think you nailed something that I guess is another thing that I would highly recommend to anyone wanting to do social performance work or social impact work, is to really understand data. And if you don't feel comfortable with it, I would say that's something that you should put in your professional
Absolutely.
development for sure. Because it's not enough just to say that I know there's a risk, and it's not, and it's not to question that you're right. It's a question to whether or not you communicate and can articulate to an executive or to a board and investor why it's a risk, and give the evidence to support that risk, and then how you would
Exactly.
manage it. Because if you can't do that, it's really hard to get people on board. I hear this something that a lot of people get frustrated about in the social impact world around, why do we have to, collect the data? And my answer is probably exactly what you explained, is that you need to speak their language. That is their world. That is their language. They've got to be answerable to their investors or to somebody else. There's always someone to answer to, and they need to do it. So we need to do it for them. And the best way to get them on board is to do their job for them. Give
And
them the answer.
understanding as well, like the time frame. So getting comfortable, and this is maybe a young person starting out in the social performance impact space, getting a real comfort with, okay, I need to be reporting monthly on this, quarterly on that, annually on this. Very important. Getting very well versed on annual reports and, the financial section of the annual report. Also
Mm,
to getting really comfortable on any investor reporting, understanding those, because those are data rich, but there's also that, and you hear this all the time with accountants, actually there's a whole narrative in the numbers as well that can
yes.
also be flushed out and conveyed to stakeholders as well. And that can be sometimes, okay, it may have to start with, okay, we have this data set, but okay, we've also in the sector have this much bigger data opportunity. And that can be found through industry groups or even government agencies. I mean, they can be a plethora, UN bodies. So I often have to say to young people, think beyond, let's say, sustainability report. And I'm not putting sustainability reporting down, but even that has a narrow focus. And the
Yes.
fact is, too, sometimes the data isn't rich enough in those reports. And that's where working more in collaboration with other departments is really helpful. And I often say to young people and even people who are senior in the field, okay, make sure that all your data is auditable as well.
Yes. Good point.
Mm-hmm.
And it's really interesting. The timing one is particularly important because it's around a fiscal timing, right? When reports are due, when funding decisions will be made. So you really do need to understand the links between those things.
Mm-hmm.
A lot to think about. A lot to think about. But I really like the measurements important. And I would say to people also, you mentioned that, the council say that, there's bigger stories in the numbers. And I would point to some of these really wonderful demographers and futurists who are really great at taking data and telling the story, because that is a skill set you can learn. That fits, I think, social impact and social performance work really well, because it probably fits more with how we communicate. But if you can weave the two and take the data and tell the story with it, it's really quite powerful. And it's something worth investing some time again to develop that muscle, which I think is kind of what you were describing, really, like being able
Yes.
to put numbers on those stories. It's well and good to know the story, but if you marry it with those numbers, you'll be hitting the mark a lot more frequently, I would imagine.
Exactly.
When we're talking about metrics, seeing as we're talking about metrics, is there one in particular that you think people should really pay attention to in the social performance world?
I myself, for the last couple of years, have really paid close attention to closure consistency, because there is that piece in, especially in the extractive industries, of understanding, okay, yes, it's wonderful to build the site and get it operating, but there's also the closure side of it, and anything to do with remedy and how that can be traced as well. So if a grievance mechanism or incident system isn't consistent, a company could really be blind to early warnings. So really having that good grievance mechanism in place for both employees and community members, and acting on it in a timely manner. So understanding, okay, also too, that sometimes these systems, for example, a grievance mechanism, it needs to be re-engineered and on a regular basis sometimes. And that can help spot where patterns, whether they're early or how to escalate them, how those can be properly dealt with. But, on the social risk management side, it really does become, okay, how do you not get out of that high level and get into that operational risk management? So not getting too into the weeds, but at the same time, being able to hover over the weeds, as I said, so you can keep at that 50% strategy and 50% action planning and risk management on that operational side. Kind of a long answer to your question. And I think, I think it's really checking in on what other metrics that your colleagues are looking at. But really, I think so much work with the social performance space does get down to remedy traceability and good grievance mechanism. And a good grievance mechanism needs to be looked at on a regular basis.
Yeah, absolutely, 100%. It would be remiss of me not to talk about, when we're talking about social performance and social impact work, to talk about the human rights policy and how you take human rights policies into practice. What do you have any advice on that to people? Because I think, human rights is a lot of the core. Social impact work is quite often about the most vulnerable, especially when you're putting that risk lens on. So how do you do that? Do you have any pointers to those listening around how you take a policy and put it into some kind of practice?
Well, I'm going to say something that might sound a bit controversial. Policies are easy. It's the practice that gets the hard piece. So that's the understanding the clear accountabilities, the control testing, and integrating it into operational systems, and of course executing it. So what I found with human rights, and it's a rather broad answer, and probably will, if we were sitting in an auditorium and with many others, would generate a lot of questions, Andrea. But what I always think is very important to turn a policy into practice, particularly in the human rights space, which is getting more and more traction nowadays, is having those controls in place, having like a vendor oversight, very important, risk registers again,
Yes.
worker welfare systems, and understanding that your policy will go through an assurance review or an audit
Yes.
review. Very, very important. So human rights, it's part of weekly operations decisions. So it has to become part of the decision-making process. Like it's almost like a guidepost in the roadmap of decision-making. And it's not just for the annual report, but at the operational level, that's where real change happens, and finding those champions within operations who will support that human rights policy into practice. Very important. And I have found, having worked in human rights space on and off for about 12 years now, I've found that the most unlikely champions are the ones who can really push the needle further along. And I don't always like that term, but it's a good one to use, is pushing the needle further along, because they either know the stakeholders, or they just know how to work a policy into practice. and they know how to present it because they've done it before. They've done it more times than, let's say, someone like myself has probably done it, and they've done it on a huge gamut of issues.
Yeah, that's fantastic. You're not alone, I think, is the message I get in that. Like, really leverage the other people in your organization who have either a passion or a skill or previous experience working in some of these issues to work with you to move that needle along, as you say. I think that's
And
a
that's
great message. Yeah,
And that's where good employee engagement comes into play. And it's
yeah.
also where working groups can be formed. And that's very important as well, is okay, doing it as a team, not as an individual. And that's where I have been challenged in my career, is thinking, well, it's all up to me.
Yes, I
And
think
it's
we've
not.
probably all been there at some point in our career where we've, that light bulb goes on and goes, oh, it's not just all about me. I don't
Well,
have
this
to do
is it. And I've, let's say, received feedback from colleagues saying to me, well, hold it, you're just too possessive. You set up these barricades around your work. And it's like, oh, but if you'd said, and it's like, well, hold it, I have to speak to myself and say, Isobel,
everything.
you have to open the gates for everyone
Yes.
to come in. Yeah.
Yeah. Take responsibility to spread your work around and seek out those who can support you in what you want to achieve. And sometimes it may mean letting someone else lead parts of the work because
Absolutely.
they're better positioned to do so. And I
Exactly.
think that's a skill in of itself, being able to recognize that ability in somebody else and that skill, and to let go of the pieces of work, which isn't always easy, but it's something worth practicing and getting used to doing. I think it
Hmm.
certainly adds value. And in the current climate, with increasing cost of living, introduction of AI and what that means for people, what does it mean to do local employment? Is that changing in our work and including suppliers? Like, do you see that changing? I mean, I think this is a really critical, I've always seen this as critical in the social impact work that I do, that local employment is, and local suppliers are really important, local and regional in particular.
Yes. Well, I mean, that AI acronym, as soon as you say that, it's sort of like a game changer to a question. But
Sorry, it's just like,
no, don't be. It's a necessity. But local participation has to be designed into a project or initiative, or even a department mandate. I mean, it's just absolutely important. And it can't be added later. It has to be added at the front. And I think I've said that throughout this presentation. But, meaningful inclusion, especially for local employment, you really have to look at, okay, clear procurement pathways, very important. So getting those RFPs out and getting the community to understand, okay, what it is that's needed, because sometimes the community can't provide it. And it has to come, let's say from, if it's a heavy piece of machinery, sometimes it has to come from another part of the world. It's not even manufactured in the country that we live in.
yes,
Understanding that long-term skill development. So taking on that capacity building process, and communities love that. So that
yeah,
might be supporting, let's say, a course or a workshop or even a diploma program at a local college where people can learn. I mean, in many instances, especially in the extractive industries, learning a trade. So they don't have to necessarily leave their community or in their family and everything to go somewhere else to do the training. They can do it in the community. And that's
yes,
very important. And then, of course, too, the visibility and of the contractor performance. So being, having those site visits available to members of the community, and putting posts on social media saying, okay, this has happened today, and this will get us closer to this goal and or completion rate. That's very important. And then, of course, too, there's just the benefits that align with the community's priorities. So understanding if there is a policing issue, how is the community supporting local policing? How are they supporting, let's say, traffic patterns? Like I said earlier, are they putting in more speeding radars? Are they okay with commuting traffic to a work site? Are they providing, let's say, a bike path for bicyclists to commute to work that way, as opposed to having, people driving into the work site Now that I understand that's not always possible, bike lanes, but it's something that's an opportunity there that, can offer employment, and then, well, offer not only employment at the site, but also the building of that. Also, too, some communities are just saying, like, look, we want the workers to be bussed in and out of the community. We don't want individual cars clogging up the road unnecessarily. So offering, let's say, a bus shuttle service can be very helpful. But I've seen where things work beautifully with companies, and I've also seen where they've engaged, let's say, Indigenous suppliers, let's say local councils. They've provided training partners that have stayed in the community, and it really does have to happen early on. And that's where, economic participation becomes most sustainable, because there is that long-term thinking, not just short-term. Okay, we need to provide X amount of welding courses so we can get 10 welders to work for the next year. It's like, okay, we offer a welding program and we're going to keep that there for 5 years as a test and see how much uptake there is in the community. And then, we're going to ensure that all, 10 each year individuals who go through the welding program, they are taken right onto site, let's say with an apprenticeship program as well.
They're beautiful examples. Thank you for sharing those examples, because it makes it more real for people. Because
this is it as well.
And local participation it's quite complex, because you pointed out to some things that are obvious. The work is coming in, but there's also the flow-on effect impacts that relate to your project around, the emergency services, the schools, the health, the education. And I think it's really important to also people to lend their eyes to how a project can improve those kinds of local content as well.
I've also seen something very interesting with companies, and one particular company I worked for, they offered a proposal writing service to the community to help people access government funding. And it's like, okay, this person will help you, person X or group X, write a proposal to gain further federal or provincial or state funding. Because that can be a challenge as well, as just not knowing how to draft and craft a proposal. Yeah.
Building that local, and I like that where you pointed that example, but earlier in the discussion you also mentioned the capability uplift as part of that local content. I'm conscious of the time, and I just want to make sure that before we close off the conversation, Isobel, is there anything else for our listeners that you would like to message to them? Would you like to leave them with any more pearls of wisdom from you? Because it would be remiss of me not to take advantage of having someone with your experience
I think first of all is always in the social performance space is deciding early on and throughout. So checking in with oneself as to what excites me about social performance right now and impact. So understanding those shifts between value and resilience and compliance, but also, realizing that it's important to keep your company engaged. So how, getting on those agendas of meetings, and it doesn't have to be at the board level. It can be with the finance department to understand, let's say, community participation or human rights or Indigenous participation. Because, it's not just the ethical piece. And that's where a lot of social performance practitioners will hold up their flag and say, well, we've got to be ethical. We've got to be ethical. You've also got to be strategic as well. Because that gets back to, okay, it takes a whole village, and that can be so true within a company, but also really getting to understand the digital tools that are now available to social performance practitioners. And I won't name any here, but they're very important for understanding social sensing, getting that better data for the governance piece that we talked about and the strategy piece, but also ensuring that social risks are very visible and more visible than they have ever been before. And that's where, the piece around transparency, because it's always changing, and that's how it can be brought to the forefront as well particularly for social performance, because it's like, okay, we are being not only transparent to our communities, but also being transparent to our boards, our investors, and our partners in the projects. And the partners can be everything from civil society right up to a joint venture partner of a listed company or something along that line. That's what keeps, I think it's also to understanding what really keeps you, and in my case, me, motivated to do this work. And, I've worked in some really complex environments. I think we've kind of discussed that. And I encourage your listeners to tap into my LinkedIn as well, because I've convey a lot of my experience and understanding in my LinkedIn, but also to understanding like how complex the work can be. And that can be anywhere from Canada straight through to, let's say, South America or the Middle East. But what really keeps me motivated is seeing where there's the tangible improvements. And I touched upon them in this discussion. And, just making communities not necessarily better, because I like to think that the community is always great that I go into, but making them, let's say, safer, making them more adaptable, making them scalable, these communities. And that's what I really try to gain when I work in the area of social performance. And like I said, that can also be the flip side on the internal side with a company. So really, impact is what you can see, because you can see it everywhere, but it's also that trust piece and how that can be rebuilt as well and built back better.
Isobel, thank you so much for giving your time and for sharing your wealth of knowledge and experience with the audience. Thank you very much. Is there anywhere else that you mentioned LinkedIn, and we'll pop that into the comments, but is there anything else, anywhere else that people can find you?
That's the best place to find me. I don't have an X account right now, but LinkedIn, and I'm fairly active on it, so that's great. And
Great.
I do have an email address which I can pop into with you. I can provide it, but the best way is LinkedIn.
Excellent. Well, if you want to reach out to Isobel, details are below. And again, Isobel, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you for watching. And if you're listening, thank you for listening. Remember to hit the like button, share it with your friends, and subscribe. When you subscribe to the channel, I get more interesting guests, and we can all learn, grow, and share our stories together. Thank you for listening. Remember, hit the like button, share, subscribe.